Alright, in this video we're going to talk about how we can create some low resolution geometry for our 3D diorama project. And specifically, I've started out with some drawings here of a log. I'm going to create a log for us that has some interesting features to it, and just to be clear, I am cheating a bit here. I have found some imagery here from Pinterest. I tried to go back and find precisely where I had downloaded this from on Pinterest, and I couldn't, so I apologize to the creator of this. I did not make this myself. It's quite cool, though. And in this drawing here, we can see that we have a bit of a 3/4 view here. We have a back view here. And even though I have these views here, I still like to go through and try to draw them out myself, just so that I get a sense of what the overall shape is and getting a kind of a sense of the outlines. And so you start to do a lot of thinking when you're having to draw stuff yourself that you may not, that's the kind of thinking you may not do if you're just looking at an image. I've also tried to make it a little bit easier by getting rid of this little branch here, although it would not be that difficult to add in to our final scene if we really wanted to. Also, there are some views that we don't really have at our disposal here. So for instance, I have a view here of the front of just trying to get a sense of what do all of these little parts that stick out look like from a front view. On the other side of this, it's not really clear. We may have a log that's been cut down and this is just shear, like the chainsaw went through it there, or it may be recessed like this. And so that's a decision that you would have to make as an artist, and doing some of these initial drawings would help you to make those decisions so that when you go in, you're not creating this blind, so to speak. So I like to do this. I like to set these out. I try to make them relatively proportional to each other. In some cases, I like to bring them in as image planes, and in other cases, sometimes I just use them as a bit of a reference point. Because I already have good imagery here, I will probably work from this image alone, but if you're creating your own stuff from scratch, obviously you're going to have to be working from whatever the imagery is that you make. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to show you the result before we go into the how-to of it. So here I have my, my low-resolution version of this log, all right? And if we take a look at Maya here, what this tells me is that I have 172 faces. So for our project, we're trying to keep all of our assets below 500 faces. So this one definitely comes in below that. And when you look at the original here, there's a lot of detail on here. But much of that detail is going to come through and be textural, right? So we're trying to maximize what we can get out of the existing faces here, and then leaving the rest of it up to textures. Now, when I created this, like I said, that back side there, I didn't know if it was just going to be cut and sheared or if it was going to be recessed. And when I made this originally, I decided that I would just sort of make it a bit sheer to contrast with this side. All right, so we're going to recreate this. We'll go in and do another version of this. It'll be more or less the same. And I'll talk to you about the very basic ways that we can get on with this project. So to start with that, let us go in and create a new scene. All right. So first thing first is we need to set up our units inside of Maya so that they work friendly with Unity. And in order to do that, we'll come down to our animation settings here, and we'll go to settings, and we are going to change the working units from centimeters into meters. So we'll save that. And now all of these little squares are 1 meter apart. All right. Another thing that I'll want to do is I'll want to turn on this heads-up display here, which gives me all of the feedback about how many faces, for instance, I have in my scene. So to do that, we can come into our windows and come into, display, not windows, display, heads-up display, and we will come down to poly count. All right, so I already have this one on, but if you turn it on or off, it will give you that little bit of a heads-up display there on the side. Okay, so when we look at a log, when we look at this in general, we want to start thinking about what is the primitive shape that is most similar to this. So those shapes are, a sphere, a cube, a cylinder, and then some others. So if we look at like create polyprims, sphere, cube, cylinder, cone, torus, plane, disk, and then some other things. Well, really, if we think about it, the closest thing to it is actually a cylinder. So let's go ahead and create a cylinder. And I want this to be along the horizontal axis, so I'm just going to go ahead and rotate this. I'm going to hold down J while I click and rotate, and that's going to snap it to nice 15-degree intervals, or actually, sorry, 25-degree intervals, actually. Oh, no, 15. I was right the first time. I should probably just listen to my intuition. All right, 15-degree intervals. And I can start to just sort of stretch it out a little bit, right? Now, in order to make this work really well for us, I'm going to want to turn on, I want to be able to see my work here. I want to be able to see this as a reference point. So I'm going to go ahead and use a little software called Quadro. This is a standalone software. It doesn't have to be installed. And it's cool because it actually just loads up imagery that can stay on top of the screen. So I'm going to close out of this view here, and I'm going to go ahead and launch Quadro, if it will let me. And I'll say add local image. It's going to ask me where I want to find this local image, and go and find this. And a big long pathway to go find it. And it's in here. There we go. Had to remember where it was. All right, so I'm going to click on that. And what's cool about this is now I can right-click on this image here and say always on top. And that way, even as I'm working here in Maya, it's just going to stay on top there. So it's going to make it a lot easier for us to actually see what we're working with. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to add some extra intervals here. I want to add some subdivisions along the height of this tree, basically. And you can see right now that if I look at this, already I'm at 60 faces. It has a lot of faces around the outside because it's trying to make it as circular as possible, but in reality, we don't really need all of those. When we're working low poly, we can start to bring those down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the input section over here of my log, and I'm going to click on polycylinder, and I'm going to change the number of subdivisions along the axis down to something like 8. All right. So there's quite a few less subdivisions there. That's probably maybe a little bit too low. Maybe I'll go to 10. All right, that might be a little bit better. Okay. Now we've reduced the overall edges down to 50, so that's a reduction of 10. And we are going to want to add some subdivisions along the height. Okay. So if I maybe change this to 6, that's probably plenty. All right, and now we're at a total number of faces of 80. Okay, so I don't always look at this, but it is nice to be able to see what the differences are that I've created so far. All right, so what I would want to do now is to create some basic proportional adjustments. First off, I'd want to make sure that this is probably about as the correct size. Remember, all of these are 1 meter increments, so this whole thing is probably a bit too big in general right now. If I think about this log, it's probably slightly over 2 meters. So maybe something like that, lengthwise. And let's see. So in the center here, if I grab my vertices, my vertex controls, right-click to grab that, I am going to go in and maybe grab the center of that. And what I want to do is to take all of these vertices and shrink them down. But I like to do this proportionally. So I'm going to undo that. If I hit B, B as in boy, it's going to turn on what's called soft selection. And if I hold down B and then click and drag left and right with my left mouse button, you'll see that it starts to increase and decrease this little circle, which indicates a fall off area. And you can start to see that it's having some color feedback going on here on the log. What this is saying is that these ones that are in yellow are going to get the full effect of this scale change, but these ones over here in red are going to get some of the effect of it, but it's going to be reduced. There's a bit of a fall off going on here, and these guys are going to get even less, and over here, they're not going to be affected at all. So if I start to pull that down, you can see that now it's affecting all of them. All right, so that's kind of cool. And if you ever have that on by accident, because it's very possible that you might at some point, you can just turn it off by hitting B as well. These guys over here, they're going to get a similar adjustment in general. I'm just going to sort of pull that down there a little bit, maybe even pull this down a little bit more, and grab all these guys. Always make sure that you're looking through to ensure that you've selected everything, because it's quite possible to inadvertently not get everything. All right, so now we're starting to get that kind of shrunken tube nature of this log here. And on this side, it's actually probably a little bit bigger than it is on this side. All right, again, I'm just sort of eyeballing it here. Usually, if I had an image plane I was working from here, I could really use that as my guide. So, it's nice to have image planes, but in this case, it's a relatively straightforward object. All right, so I'll work with that, and that's looking pretty good. Okay, so what's the next most important part of this log, the next feature? Well, it's probably this recess that we have right here. So how do we want to create that? Well, ultimately, we want to be able to get an edge here that allows us to pull out these parts of the log, essentially. But instead of, I don't really want to pull them out any farther. I kind of want to push this back. Now, in order to do that, I need to be able to separate this part of the log from the outside. And one way to do that would be if I came into object mode, right click and choose object mode. If I hold down Shift and right click, one of my options is called the Insert Edge Loop tool. And this is really good because it will drag a nice, if I click and left mouse click and drag here, it will create a nice edge loop around the outside edges of this cylinder here. And if I let go, it actually creates that sitting right there right now. So those have all been cut. But if I try doing it right here along the inside, you'll see that it doesn't work. And that's because these guys are all terminating into a single vertex. So I'm going to undo that real quick. So my normal method would be to use the Insert Edge Loop tool. That would be the most advisable thing if I was trying to create these anywhere else along this log. But in this case, I'm going to have to use a different tool. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to use, Shift right click, the Multi-Cut tool. So the Multi-Cut tool allows me to go in and choose a location along one of these edges that I want to create a new vertex at. So if I start here and I hold down the button, the left mouse button as I'm laying this down, you can see that's giving me kind of a percentage of the distance that I've traveled down that edge. So I'm just going to try to get something around 10% there. And then I'm going to left click on this one over here, try to get this pretty close to 10%, and get this one pretty close. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be near. And that way we're creating these edges that are pretty similarly placed compared to their neighbors. Right, just doing that do. Right. And when you come back to the first one here, if you click and drag over the original one, it will snap. And that way they're in the same location. Now what I need to do is press enter. And it will now lay these down as new edges that are at new vertices alongside here. So what I can do now is go in and I'll go to my face mode and I'll click, shift click all of these faces here. All right, because I'm going to want to extrude these, but instead of pulling them out, I'm going to push them in. I'm going to hold down Shift, right click, and go to Extrude Face. And I'm just going to push backwards here a bit. You see that eventually it starts to kind of edge out. That the part that I'm pulling back here is actually wider than the part that I'm leaving it at. So I got to get this to a decent location, but I'm going to also have to probably scale this down a bit. So I'll click on one of these little cubes, which is the scale tool. It will change the gizmo into a scale gizmo. And I'll just sort of pull down a bit there to shrink it down a bit. So that way the edges are not sticking out, because otherwise that would be weird. All right. And then if I maybe just decide to pull it forward a little bit here more, I can still scale it up a bit. There we go. And that's all good. Okay, so we have our basic part of this log going on here. Now, what we'd want to do is to figure out, on this other side here, maybe you want to do the same thing. Like I did before, I had created this kind of shear before, but right now I think I might go in and do that same kind of multi-cut tool thing. I'm just going to do it really fast. I'm not going to be overly concerned about perfection here. Oops. And if you make a mistake like I just did there, you can just hit the backspace button, and that will go back to the previous cut that you'd made without losing anything. You can backspace a bunch if you have made a bunch of cuts that you don't like. All right, and I'll hit enter. There we go. And again, we'll just go ahead and grab these faces, extrude them, and pull it back, shrink it down. All right, there we go. Cool. And now if I look at this, I have 120 faces total. So it's still relatively low poly. Okay. What about if I want to actually, pull out these little bits of wood here? Well, it's a smart idea to go in and probably count how many actual pieces of wood there are here. If I look at this, what I can see is that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 individual little extra pieces of bark there. All right, but if I count along here, if I start from the top one, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, that means that I'd probably have to double up on one of these. And probably whatever the biggest one is. So maybe this one or this one here I would double up on. So what I want to do is I want to start pulling these out. And I'm going to use the same kind of philosophy here. I'm going to use extrude, but I'm going to pull things out now. So if we go to face mode, and let's go ahead and start with this one up here. We're going to actually grab both of these real quick and pull them out, just because these guys are, this looks like the biggest piece of wood right here, I think. I'm just sort of like, I'm trying to look at this in a meaningful way. I think possibly maybe this one is the biggest piece of wood right here. Okay, so we'll start with this one here. I'm thinking aloud as I do this because that's just my normal way. I have to think my way through a process. So we'll grab this and we'll choose extrude face. We're going to pull this out and we're just going to pull it up a bit. All right. Now, as we pull this up, I'm going to hit F there to focus up on it. Notice that as I pull this up, this guy's edge still stays faced forward. So I'm just going to rotate it back a little bit there so that it's not quite as odd. And in fact, I may want to grab these vertices and just kind of move them up and around a little bit, right? We really want this to sort of feel like it's flanging out. Okay. If we now go in and go to, actually before we go to face mode, let's go ahead and push these toward each other a little bit because this starts to taper, right? If I try to scale it down, that does seem to work there. Another way I could do it is to grab the individual vertices. These guys on top, for instance, probably shouldn't be spaced out so far. So I'm just going to pull them back a little bit so that they kind of taper in and away. There we go. I think that looks better. Now what we can do is go in face mode, grab these guys. I'm going to grab both of them at this time, and I'm going to go to extrude face, and we'll pull this out. All right. Now, when we're working this way, we have a bit more geometry to play with, so I might go into an edge mode, for instance, and I might grab this edge to help pull that out, and that's going to help us get this sort of extra little bit of point that goes on right here. And then I'd want to go in and start maneuvering these vertices back a little bit. All right. Now, this really depends on your relative comfort level of working in a 3D space in terms of whether or not you feel capable of just sort of understanding the shape and moving it around, or if that's not so much your comfort level, then having some image planes to work from can really be helpful. Okay, I'm going to pull this over here a little bit, maybe, right? Now, I do want to point one thing out. If I were to maybe go backwards here real quick, let's go to before I extruded these guys. All right. If I had pulled this one out and extrude that and started playing around with it, maybe just sort of moving things around a little bit, adjusting the shape, and then later on I decided, oh, you know what? Actually, it would have been better if I'd grabbed both of these. But I've already started moving things around. I might go in and grab this face and say, that's okay, we can extrude this. All right, but we're going to have to be able to make these connect to each other now. So in order to do that, if this is a situation you find yourself in, you're gonna have to use a few other tools. Hit F there so I focus up on that. First off, what we're gonna wanna do is to connect this vertex here. Let's go to vertex mode. Connect this vertex to this vertex, and then this vertex to this vertex. But we don't wanna do that while we still have these two faces right here. So we would have to go in and delete that face, and click on this one and press delete. And now that way these are actually opened meshes. So what I can do now is I can go to vertex mode. I'm going to grab this one, and I'm going to shift right click and choose merge vertices to center. All right. I'll click on this one and click on this one. We're going to do the same process, but we can repeat the same process just by hitting G. G as in girl. All right. And now those are connected together. Okay, so in a situation like that, it's relatively simple, so long as you don't have too many faces, to make changes, all right, and to connect things up. So if I was wanting to move these guys around a little bit, these ones would probably go back a bit more. These ones would probably go back a bit more. Maybe in this direction here. Oops, I really moved that too far. So always be orbiting around, making sure that you know exactly what's happening to your geometry. Don't ever get into the habit of just working from one angle, because that's really dangerous. And likely these faces would be pushed out a bit more as well. Okay. I'm not going to worry about making things look super right yet. I'm just going to sort of keep working on just pulling out these additional pieces. So I'll go around here real quick and just try to do this without too much explanation. We're just going to do extrude face, pull that one out. Probably scale it down a little bit there. And then we'll go into this next one. Just trying to keep the distance about the same. This one here you can see, so if we're counting here, right? This matches to this one, this matches to this one, this matches to this one here. Now we have another one over there. It's pretty similar in distance, so pull this out. Oops, undo, extrude face. Pull that there. The only difference here, if I'm looking at it, pull that down there. If I'm looking at it, this edge right here appears to be pushed. Oops, come on, vertex. This part right here seems to be down a little bit farther there. So I'd probably pull that down like that. And then we have this guy here. This is a smaller one. So if I pull this out, extrude face, have that come out to about there. Again, we'll pull in that face and maybe push it to there a little bit more. And right here, this edge, just to kind of give that sense of things really being pushed back and down pretty far. We'll have that come over there like that. Right, so we're gonna have a big gap there, which is this gap right here. And grab this one, extrude, pull that out there. Okay. And again, always kind of making them flange out a little bit. That's the thing to remember. Okay. Pull this guy out. G to repeat the last command. Push it up, flange it out. All right. I can go around afterwards and sort of move some of these vertices around. G to repeat the last command. Okay. Pull down a little bit there. And then again, G to repeat the last command. Pull that out, pull it up. All right. May even twist it around a little bit there. Okay. So I can do a lot better job at actually, matching the overall shape here, and then trying to get these to all kind of follow a similar pattern, similar layout. I really messed this one up somehow. Move that up there. All right. Again, always looking at things in the third dimension. Okay. So the major things that I see dealing with this part of the tree or of the log is that these guys feel pretty pointy. All right. That feels pointy. That feels pointy. That feels pointy. All right. So how do I create those points? If I were to go in here and choose Insert Edge Loop Tool, you might think, well, if I cut a line down like that, then I could grab those couple of vertices there and pull them out. And that's very true. All right, and that would give me the point. The trouble is that in order to do that, when I created that insert edge loop, it created this edge loop that goes down the entire length of the log in both directions and creates sort of unnecessary geometry that I'm not going to use later. And that's going to add unnecessary faces into my overall count here. So let's just undo that real quick, because there's another way we can do this if we're kind of crafty about this. All right, so if instead of creating an edge loop that goes down the entire length of the log, we do the following. Let's go in and go to Insert Edge Loop tool again. And we're going to create an edge loop right about maybe here. Okay. Why there? Well, because if I grab this face now, right, grab this face here, what I can do, if I pull it out far enough, and then I go into my scale tool, I can start to scale it down. And it's not going to necessarily give me an absolute point where it's super sharp, but it's going to give me a point overall where I can see the, I can see basically that it's coming to a point. And I could, if I really wanted to, scale this down even farther so that it's nice and really sharp. So that's kind of up to you, depending on what your aesthetic is. I mean, it could go down even more like that, right? And, for most intents and purposes there, that's pretty darn sharp. And I've only added a few extra faces, and only faces in a meaningful location now by doing that. So I would go in and I would do the same thing here on this one, right? And I would do it here. And any of these other ones that have these little points that we get to. All right, so I'd pull that out, I'd pull that out, all right, and then I'd start to scale these down. Okay, and then I'd keep repositioning these until we get into an overall good shape. So some of these other ones here, like if I look at this guy here, it's got this nice sharp angle here, and then it's pretty flat there. I would probably want to go in, not go to that mode because that's a weird mode. I would go to here. Let's go in and grab those couple of vertices there. We'd pull those out, right? And then come up to here, grab these guys, sort of pull them down a bit, right? And that's going to start to give us the overall shape that we're looking for there. So we really want to try to visualize all the different shapes that are going on in here. Some of these ones are going to be really close to each other. Like if I look at the drawing right here, this shape right here is pretty much right up against this guy. And this would go actually down a little bit farther. So we pull that back down there like that, right? And then just look at it again from different angles, making sure that it's still looking right in all the different views. Okay, you might pull these guys over a little bit more, for instance, or down here like this a little bit more. What you want to avoid is anytime one of these starts to go into a weird, shape. For instance, you don't want a vertex to start doing that because that's just now collapsing on top of itself. It's known as a type of non-manifold geometry. And you also don't want to start to confuse things. Like if we had one over there, for instance, now that's a weird triangle right there. Again, another type of what we call non-manifold geometry. Non-manifold geometry makes it very difficult for the software to process things properly when you're doing various geometry calculations. So, I could go over here and I could repeat the process. In this case, I would be using my imagination a bit, or I would create a drawing of what I would want that to be as a basis to work from. So I'm not going to go through and do that whole process because I think you can see from what I've done so far, the overall, the overall process is fairly self-explanatory at this stage. If I wanted to, I could scale this whole group up here a little bit more. And that way I can, maybe I think that this is now a bit too far back. So what I can do is I go in here, I'll grab these, right? And I'll pull it out. Maybe pull it forward a little bit. Maybe I have to scale it up a little bit. All right. So that's my basis for creating this. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is go in and actually one word before I move on. If I wanted to, I could pull out this little branch. And to do that, you can probably already guess what you need to do. Maybe it's along this face right here. This is just another extrude face operation, right? So I would probably want to go in, and maybe before I extrude that face, maybe I'd want to go in and go to object mode, do an insert edge loop tool, or actually I can do one better. Instead of using insert edge loop here, because I don't want it to be such a big square, what I can do is, let's go back to object mode. We'll go to extrude again, but we're going to extrude. Come on, sorry, face. Sorry, I am clicking on wrong things. There we go. Grab that face. Now we go to extrude face. All right, before I extrude from it, I'm going to go in and I'm just going to scale down the face. All right, scale it down in that direction. And right now you notice how that the gizmo is kind of weirdly oriented there. If I click on this little power button, it will reset it to be along a local orientation. And now that's actually a lot better for my purposes. So what I can do is I just sort of scale it down along that axis there. And that's all well and good. I'll just go to vertex mode and kind of move a few of these vertices around a little bit. I want to create something that's a bit like a square right here. Okay, like that. Okay, and then this face, this new face, is what I want to extrude from for that. And as you can see, that takes up far less geometry than what I was doing before. So we're really trying to always be economical with our geometry here. In fact, some of this here may need to be moved around a little bit more before I get into doing that. If you really get in here and kind of look at that, you can see that part of this is depressed down, which we don't want. So before I start to work from this, I just want to make sure that I'm not creating any kind of weird surface issues. So let's go in face mode. Now we can extrude that. Extrude face, and it's going to extrude up from the normal here. So there we go. We can start to extrude out that way. And we could continue to just sort of reduce the size there. I might extrude again, pulls it out some more. And then, again, I'll scale down the size. And then I could just continue to edit this until I get something that bends around there like that. And that's the basic approach that I would take to creating this. And that would minimize the number of faces that I have to use. Okay, I think that's the major thing I want to talk about. The only other thing I'll mention here is something that you want to do after you have finished modeling. Right now, as you'll notice over here in the inputs, there are a bunch of actual tweaks that we've done, right? These are all the different things that we've adjusted so far, all the extrudes and all that stuff. We don't want to keep that. We want to go in and go to have the object selected and choose Edit, Delete by Type, History. And this ensures that the model is a lot more lightweight, and that also in terms of baking down all the processes that we've done to it, that gets saved out directly onto the model like this. All right, so instead of finishing the model here, since I already have a finished version, I am going to go in the next video to discuss on the totally finished version that I have a few other considerations for you. All right, I'll see you then.